Divide real numbers. So we've done adding and subtracting. We recently did multiplying, and now we're finally to dividing. If we have a number A, the reciprocal of that is 1 over A. And we call it the multiplicative inverse. The inverse property of multiplication basically says the product of a non-zero number and its multiplicative inverse is 1. So what that's saying is if I multiply A times 1 over A, so A times its multiplicative inverse, which is 1 over A, that would be equal to the same thing as if I have 1 over A times A. And essentially, all that's happening is the A on the top and the bottom are canceling, and I'm left with 1. And that's assuming A is not equal to 0 because we can't have 0 in the denominator. And with this, like if A was negative, the multiplicative inverse would be negative 1 over A. Or, yeah. So what is the multiplicative inverse? Oh, I can't spell. Of 3 over 7. Any ideas?
7 over 3.
Yep. Because if we multiply those two things times each other, so 3 over 7 times 7 over 3, what happens?
21 times 21 over 21, which is 1.
21 over 21, or I can cancel the 3's, I can cancel the 7's, and I'm left with a 1. Okay, so you can always check to make sure that what you have is really the multiplicative inverse because it should come out to be a positive 1. What if instead we had negative 2/5? What would our multiplicative inverse be?
Positive 2/5? Negative 5 over 2.
Negative 5 over 2, because whatever the sign is has to be the same, so that when I do negative 2 over 5 times negative 5 over 2, 5's cancel, 2's cancel, and a negative times a negative is positive, so that's going to give us the positive 1. So it's always going to be the same sign. So if it starts positive, the inverse, multiplicative inverse has to be positive. If it starts negative, the multiplicative inverse has to be negative. Any questions about that? All right, the next thing is the division rule. So this says to divide a number A by a non-zero number B. You can just sit right there. Thank you. Multiply A by the multiplicative inverse of B. Okay, so what this looks like is if I have A divided by B where it's written with a division symbol like that, what that means is A times, so multiply A by the multiplicative inverse of B. What is the multiplicative inverse of B?
1 over B.
Yep, 1 over B. And again, we're assuming B is not equal to 0 because we can't have 0 in the denominator. So those are the same thing. Sometimes you'll also see this. I usually write it just like this, A over B like that, but it just depends. But that would mean the same thing as well. All right, the next thing in terms of the signs when we're dividing, so they say the sign of a quotient. And I'm sure y'all have heard this before, but much like with multiplication, the quotient of two real numbers with the same sign is positive. So if I had like -2 divided by -3, this is going to end up being -2 times -1 over 3, which is going to end up being a positive 2 over 3. So if they have the same sign, it becomes positive, just like when we multiply. If we multiply two negative numbers, it becomes positive.
So like, if that -3 was a -4, on the workbook we have to show like the multiplicative inverse of the divide.
I normally wouldn't show it this way. I'm just doing it because it's how the book is showing stuff like this right now. I normally from here would just say -2 over 3, or well, -2 over -3, and then just say 2 over 3. But you can go ahead. But if it was something like where you said like if the 3 was a 4, so it was 2 over 4, you should reduce it to 1/2. So yeah, we should always reduce fractions as far as possible. Which part of this section will be like reducing down like bigger fractions and stuff like that too. So then that's if they have the same sign, it's positive. The quotient of two real numbers with different signs is negative. So if they're opposite signs, it is negative. So if I had -1 divided by 4, like that, then this would be -1 times multiplicative inverse 1 over 4. which would end up being negative 1 over 4. It would be negative because one's negative and one's positive. I don't mind if you go straight from here to here, okay? You don't have to write that middle step. I'm just doing it so you see it with the multiplicative inverse right now. And then the last thing for notes, the quotient of 0 and any non-zero real number is 0. So this would be like 0 divided by 5. That's going to be 0 because it's the same thing as like 0 times 1 over 5. And 0 times anything is 0.
So what's 0 divided by 0? 0.
0.
No, because you can't divide by 0. It's an indeterminate form.
What's that?
Is it a number?
It's not a number. You can't do it. If I reversed this and said, since y'all seem curious, if I said 5 divided by 0, I can't divide anything by 0, we would say that this is undefined. Okay? You can't have 0 in the denominator of a fraction. That's not part of this section. That was more just a fun fact for you.
I thought it was 0.
Nope. 0 has to be on top. You can't divide by 0.
So why is it with the numbers, like the other numbers, if it's not?
Because you can't divide by it. So watch. So if I did 0 divided by 5, that's 0. But if I flip it, 5 divided by 0, error, divide by 0. You can't do that. So it's going to give you an error if you do that. Oh, I hit the wrong button. And it's just going to show you it's an error. Okay? 0 can be on the top. If 0 is on the top, then it's equal to 0. If it's on the bottom, it's undefined. But in this section, you shouldn't have one that's like that. It'll come later, much later in math. Not saying you won't have it this year, but it'll be a while.
Isn't that like an easy question? Like if it has 0, it's just undefined. If it's like in
Could be. You never know. Maybe it'll be an extra credit question on your quiz.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes I do stuff like that. All right. Just for your reference, there is a thing called a concept summary on page 105. It's like a box that shows you all the rules for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. If you feel like you need a review of those different things, that's good to look at, but I'm not going to write it down for you. If you want to write it down later, that's fine, and it'll tell you when it's positive, when it's negative, when it's 0, all the things for each scenario. So it's kind of a cool little chart that they've given you. But keep looking up there at the clock, and that clock is very wrong. So all right, the first problem, say to find the multiplicative inverse. I'm just going to write MI for multiplicative inverse. I don't feel like writing the whole thing out. So number 4. -9. What would the multiplicative inverse be for this?
-1 over 9.
Yep, -1 over 9, because if we check that, we would get if we multiply them, what would we get? Yep, +1. What about -1/2? What would the multiplicative inverse of this be? Okay, -2 over 1. But I can also just write this as -2. Every whole number is able to be written over a 1. So, you know, it's not wrong if you write it over 1, but you don't have to. So I would take it either way. I will always write it this way, but if you write it the other way, that's fine. This is an interesting one. What if I have negative 2 and 2/5, and I want the multiplicative inverse of that? Any idea what I would need to do first?
Improper
Improper fraction.
Okay, what would that improper fraction be?
12 over 5.
Negative 12 over 5. So what would my multiplicative inverse be?
Negative 5
Negative
over
5
12.
over 12.
Negative 5 over 12. Yes.
Can I just sharpen my pencil?
Yes. All right, are we okay on finding the multiplicative inverse? Which
Yes.
Can I
question?
use the bathroom, please?
Yes. All right. Find the quotient. So basically, we're just dividing now. All right. Number 12. Negative 18 divided by negative 6. Now, this is exactly how they write it in the book. I want to make sure you understand why they're writing it in parentheses. Okay, they're doing the negative 18 divided by with the negative 6 in parentheses because they want to make sure you know you're not subtracting. Okay, you are dividing by a negative number. Okay, so that's why it's being written like that. So I won't usually write it as a multiplicative inverse like I was doing up here. I will usually go straight to this and then I will reduce if necessary or like fix the signs after that. So I will typically write it like negative 18 over negative 6. And then what would that reduce to?
3.
Yep, positive 3. The negative signs go away because they're both the same. So it'd be positive 3. If you want to write it as a multiplicative inverse, then we would write it as negative 18 times negative 1 over 6 like that. And then you could keep going from there. So it's up to you how you want to do it. But I usually will just go to here and then reduce if necessary.
So do we have to do one of those ways, or can you just put like the answer?
If it's something like this one, I don't really care. But if it gets to be something crazier, you would need to write that.
Okay.
As we go through examples, I'll show you ones that you would need to. But yeah, I would assume that you probably can just do negative 18 divided by negative 6 without having to write it. But I'm more just doing it so you see different ways to write it.
Got it.
All right, 14. 15 divided by, in parentheses, negative 3 over 4. All right, so I have 15 divided by negative 3 over 4. So what I need to do is, in this case, I would need to do the multiplicative inverse. Whenever you divide by a fraction, we have to basically multiply it by its inverse. So I am going to actually do this one as an multiplicative inverse. So I'd have 15 times, what is the multiplicative inverse of negative 3 over 4?
Negative 4 over 3.
Negative 4 over 3. Now what happens?
Okay.
Imagine if you need to that this is like this. What can I do?
Oh,
You can cross out the 3 and 15.
Yeah.
Yep, and what does that give me when I do that?
5.
A 5. So then 5 times negative 4 is
Negative 20.
negative 20. Good. Forgot to box that one. 16. Negative 2 over 3 divided by 2. So what happens, or what do you think I need to do with this one?
You need to flip negative 2.
Flip the
Yeah.
Of which one?
The
Oh,
first
switch it.
over 3.
Nope, the first number always stays the same.
Oh,
Okay.
two.
The number that gets flipped is always what's written after the division symbol. So it'll be negative, maybe, negative 2 over 3 times, what's the multiplicative inverse?
1 over 2.
1 over 2.
1 over 2. Now what?
You can cross out the 2's.
I can cross out the 2's. And what is that going to leave me with? Negative 1/3. Yep.
It hurts.
That's what you get.
Yeah, that's what.
Grace, no one asked you.
20. Negative 1 divided by negative 6 over 5. What do I need to do with this one?
Yeah, flip over fraction. Yeah.
Okay, so we keep the negative 1.
Yes.
You need to put that on.
Multiplied by what?
Negative
What,
5
negative
over
5 over
6.
6.
Yep, negative. Come on. Okay. Negative 5 over 6. What do I get when I multiply those things together?
5 over 6.
Yep, positive 5 over 6. Let's see, one more of these. 22. Negative 1 over 3 divided by 5 over 3. What do I have to do with this one?
Flip it.
Flip the 5 over 3.
Flip the 5 over 3, so I'm going to end up with negative 1/3 times 3 over 5, and what is that going to give me?
Negative 1 over 5.
Negative 1 over 5 because the 3's cancel. And that would be what we do there. All right, any questions on those?
Nope.
Okay, the next thing says to find the mean of the numbers. Does anybody know what that means?
Find the average.
The average, good.
Add them all up and divide.
Average. So we, add all the numbers.
And then you divide by the 7.
Divide by the number of numbers. Kind of a weird way to write it, but it's really the only way to write it. All right, so I'm assuming y'all have done this before. You seem to know what it was.
You told me to.
All right. So if you have the numbers negative 10, negative 8, and 3, what do I have to do with these to find the average?
Negative 10 plus negative 8 plus 3.
Yep, negative 10 plus negative 8 plus 3. What does that equal to?
Negative 15.
Negative 15. And then what do I do?
I'll multiply by 3.
Divided by 3.
Divide. So divide by the number of numbers. We had 3 numbers here, so divide by 3. And what are we going to get when we do that?
Negative 5.
Negative 5.
Negative 5. So this is the average or the mean for this problem. What if I have something like 26, 18, negative 9, 0, and negative 5? Any idea what this one?
Uh, 9,
1.
4.
So I need to add up all the numbers. 18 plus negative 9 plus 0 plus negative 5. And what do I get when I add them all together? 4. Then what do I divide by? 4. Thought I was going to trick you guys. Some people think, oh, I'll just leave the 0 out and I'll just find the average of everything else. Why can I not do that?
Because
It's a number.
it's still like a thing. I guess.
0 matters also, okay?
Zero has rights.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Yes, it does.
So, what is the average?
One.
1.
I knew it. You said that zero doesn't have rights.
Not here. Not here, but in number 2.
All right, one more of these ones. 30, negative 5.3, negative 2, and 1.3. So I add them all up. Negative 5.3 plus a negative 2 plus 1.3. What do I get when I add those all together?
Negative 6.
Yeah, negative 6.
Negative 6.
Negative 6, and then what do I divide by?
It's 3, and then gives you negative 2.
Negative 2, so that would be my mean for that one.
It's just easy.
Now, there is one in here that is negative 0.6, 0.18, negative 2, 5, and negative 0.5.
Not a biggie do that one. He said it was easy.
Yeah,
He
he
said
said
it was easy.
let's
Go down memory lane over to you.
All right, settle down, settle down.
What are they?
I would not expect you to do one like that without a calculator. Okay, those are some weird numbers. I know you're capable of it, but I'm not going to give you one like that. If you can show me that you can do something like any of these I just gave you, I know that you would be capable of finding that problem. Okay? I'm not going to give you one like that because I'm not giving you a calculator. Okay?
I have my own calculator.
Yeah, I got
I know that, but I mean, like,
Took care.
listen, I mean, I'm not letting you use one on a test or a quiz, so I'm not going to give you something like that, okay? All right, the next stuff says to simplify the expression. We're almost done, I promise.
This is hurting my head more than algebra.
You just said it was easy.
This
No,
is
I'm like, you
algebra.
just said it was easy.
All right, 34.
I changed my calculator.
12y minus 8 over negative 4. Now, if you continue on in math with me past like this class, like if you keep taking, you know, upper level math, then there's a different way that I would show you to do this problem. But for the sake of this class, what we need to do is we're going to split this into two things that have a common denominator, right? And I can do that because I only have a negative 4 on the bottom. Okay, or if it was a positive number, it would work the same way. What I can do is I can split this into two separate fractions. So this is going to become 12y over negative 4. And then you can do minus 8 over negative 4. Okay? Then I would just reduce each part of the fraction individually. Okay? So ignore this part over here for the moment. If I reduce 12y over negative 4, what am I going to get?
Negative 3y.
Negative 3y. What do I get then if I do negative 8 divided by negative 4?
Negative 2.
No, just 2.
Oh.
Positive 2. They're both negative. Negative 8 over negative 4 would be a positive 2. So the answer would be negative 3y plus 2.
I mean, even if it was negative 2, it'd still be a minus, so it's the same thing.
That was not Sam.
All right.
You said it too, buddy.
36. Negative 6p plus 15 divided by 6. So what is this going to split into?
Negative 6p
divided by 6, and then 15 divided by 6.
Okay, and then now I want to reduce. So what is the first part going to give me?
Negative
one
1p.
p.
Okay, so I can just write it like that. You don't have to write the 1. If you write it, it's not wrong, but you don't have to write it. It's understood. What about the 15 over 6 part?
2 and 3 over 6 are 2.5.
Okay, so you can either write it as 2.5, or you can just reduce this, take out a 3, and be left with 5 over 2. So I'll take it either way. So you can either do it this way, or you can write it as negative p plus 2.5, like that, okay? Let's see, 40. Negative 20b plus 12 over negative 5. What does this one split into?
Negative 20b divided by 5.
Negative 5. And then what's the next part?
Negative 12 divided
12
by
divided by negative 5.
12 is positive, so I need to make sure 12 over negative 5 on the bottom. So you just got to make sure you watch your signs with these, to be honest. What do I get with this first part when I reduce it?
4b.
4b. What about this part?
2 and 2 over 5.
Yep, so I can either write it as, leave it as negative 12 over 5 like that, or I can say 4b minus 2 and 2 over 5 like that. So I would take it either way. I don't care which way you write it. Any questions about this stuff?
No.
All right. Problems are 3, 7, 9, 11, 17, 19, 25, 27, 35, and 37.